Continuing our discussion here on the Bob Dutko Show with Pastor Christopher Thoma, author of the book The Angel's Portion, A Clergyman's Whisky Narrative. Okay, so Pastor, we were talking about the pietism issue and certainly the feeling that some people have toward the idea of alcohol. And I mean, this is kind of a hurdle that we got to get over early on in this discussion before getting to some of the things specifically about whiskey. What do you say, Pastor, to some who listen to you and look at your book and say, you know what, why even go there? We got so many alcohol problems today. Okay, kind of like Paul, everything may be permissible, but does it edify? With somebody with drunken driving and all the kind of problems we have today and people falling into drunkenness, isn't this causing people to stumble? Wouldn't it just be better to not go down the road of alcohol at all, let alone whiskey?
Well, during the break, because I had mentioned over the airwaves Romans 14 and 1 Corinthians 8, I just checked in my scriptures to make sure I'm being accurate in the locations. And I was thinking a little bit more about that. I guess what I would say is, even though those may be the cultural situations and some of the concerns of people, that doesn't necessarily negate our necessity to speak with regard to truth, no matter what the topic is, especially when it comes to the Holy Scriptures. And so when you come to these kinds of texts exegetically and not eisegetically, and if anybody's listening is not familiar with those words, exegetical essentially is to take from the text what's present there. Eisegetics are the practice of imposing upon the text things that are foreign. So you bring your agenda to it and you try to write your agenda into the Word. When you look at those texts from Paul exegetically, you'll see that Paul, he's absolutely forbidding the Christians from imposing upon the one he calls the weaker brother, something that causes him to stumble. And then Paul gives these examples of how he would absolutely not go into a household that abstains from meat and wine and give them a hard time about abstaining. That's clearly sinful behavior. They may have the reasons for abstaining, so leave it alone as long as it's neither commanded nor forbidden, and we call that adiaphora. It's neither commanded nor forbidden by the Scriptures. So give them a chance to learn the Word. But in the same way, throughout the whole discussion, in both of those sections, Paul spends some time making sure we understand the difference between giving an offense, taking an offense, and then he even adds a few thematic statements in the absolute best places in the text so that we know that we ought never, ever let weaknesses have the final say in anything, but rather we should take that time to catechize, to teach, so that what's good and what God gives as a free gift is never relegated to something that's evil. And if you think about that in a practical sense, what if the content of the gospel, and maybe that's very practical today, what if certain aspects of the gospel, truth, and we're hearing that in the homosexual debate, we're hearing that in all kinds of different debates, what if those things get relegated to the category of evil as opposed to us simply trusting what the Word has to say, and they become offensive to a weaker brother? So Paul is being very straightforward on this because he knows systematically that we have to be careful to instruct in the truth and never back down from speaking the truth, in love, of course. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting, too, in chapter 15 of Romans, verse 3 and 4, that's where Paul gets a little bit what we call Minnesota nice. He says that while we're discerning that truth, essentially, the accusations of a weaker brother should be received without anger in the same way that Jesus is receiving the insults heaped upon him. So we're kind of being compared to, be patient, as the Lord was patient. Don't cause them to stumble, but at the same time, don't sacrifice the truth of what you know to be true.
Right. When you look at the argument, too, that some people will say that, well, hey, there's so much alcoholism today and such. I can't help but think to myself, well, there wasn't alcoholism 2,000 years ago? There was certainly a lot back then. And
there must have been if Paul was making the instruction of Timothy,
right.
Especially in 1 Timothy. He tells him, don't overindulge. There's plenty of scriptural evidence to say don't get drunk.
Right.
Drunkenness is absolutely a sin. And I would venture to say that every time you come across those texts in Scriptures, the prohibition is always leaning toward drunkenness. It's never toward abstaining unless there is the potential for drunkenness.
Right. Well, and by the way, I would say just in exercising wisdom, if someone struggled with alcoholism, or maybe they were an alcoholic, or they have a propensity toward this or something, then obviously I think just mere and simple wisdom would be, don't do that. It's probably best for that person not to drink alcohol if they are susceptible to caving in. And by the same token, Pastor, if I'm out to dinner with someone and that person is a struggling alcoholic, or that person is tempted to fall into alcoholism or whatever, I wouldn't even have a glass of wine in front of them, because I wouldn't want to cause that person to stumble.
No, you wouldn't want to, because we have the words of God to us telling us right away that would be sinful behavior. We are causing a brother to stumble, and so we discern accordingly. Right. But we're discerning according to the Word of God as the objective truth, not according to the culture, not according to what we think is true. We're not imposing upon that Word. We're letting the Word impose upon us and shape us, cultivate us.
Right. Okay, well, let's do this. Hang on just a moment. We'll spend our last few minutes together next, and let's talk a little bit of whiskey. More with Pastor Christopher Thoma. The book, again, folks, The Angel's Portion. And you're listening to The Bob Dutko Show.